Welcome everyone to our Packers News pre-draft live stream, virtually alongside Pete Dougherty. I am Olivia Reiner. Pete, it has been so long since I've been able to talk to you over our live stream, and it's been just as long since we've been able to have a conversation with all of you. If you're new here, welcome. We always love to hear from you down below in the Facebook chat. Make sure to leave a comment, a question that you generally have about the draft, about the upcoming offseason program. Anything that is deep within your heart, we would be happy to address it today. Before we get into that, let's talk about General Manager Brian Gutekunst's press conference call today with the local media. We talked about a number of topics. First, I'd like to discuss the fact that the NFL had a mock draft today. It sounds like there were some snafus. ESPN reported that the Bengals had an issue getting in their first pick. It delayed everything by a couple of minutes. However, Brian Gutekunst did acknowledge that he thought the draft went pretty smoothly. He's got IT setting up all of his draft communications that he'll need at his own home where he will be conducting the draft. He said it kind of reminds him back in 2012 when he was transitioning under former general manager Ted Thompson from binders to a digital system. Pete, how much of an issue will a virtual draft present to Brian Gutekunst and his staff?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's that much. I mean, I'm not equating these things exactly, but I just did a USA Today draft on Zoom early this afternoon, and we did a practice run last Thursday, I think it was. And there were hitches and a lot of things talked about, and it took a long time, But then when we did it today, it went off without any problems. Now, what they're doing is obviously, a million times more complex, but they also have a lot of experts working on it. So, sure, there's the possibility for problems. And I think the league is going to take a common sense approach where if somebody's working out a trade and they're, it looks like they're going to be 15 or 30 seconds late, I think they'll just pause the clock for them and let them get the deal done. They haven't done this before, so you don't know what might happen. But I suspect there'll be little glitches here and there, but overall it'll come off, just fine.
Speaking of trades, Brian Gutekunst acknowledged on the call today that is what he's most concerned about. If there happens to be any sort of delay of communication in between two teams, he's concerned that he won't be able to pull off a certain trade. As you mentioned, the NFL sounds like they're going to be able to give some leeway to some of those teams if there is an issue in terms of how much time they're allotted to make a trade. How will a virtual draft specifically impact the frequency of trades we're used to seeing?
Yeah, none of us knows, and he was asked that and really didn't have an answer. He said he hoped not at all. He must have said, I guess, in 3 times, that he hopes there's a lot of trades. He likes to do his wheeling and dealing and moving up and down the board and picking up extra picks and then moving up after he has those extra picks, moving up for guys targeted. So, it sounds like, I guess none of us knows how it's going to go. The communication, he said the biggest problem with the communication will just be when he's in the same room with the scouts, he can hear their phones ringing. He can see them talking to somebody. So he knows that they're talking about deals with teams. He has those visual cues, which he won't have as readily now because he won't be in the same room. But I'm sure they have multiple ways of communicating. And, I'm just taking a wild stab here, but I wonder if there'll still be just the same number of trades because, where there's a will, there's a way. And a lot of these GMs, they like to deal.
We know the GMs like to deal. We know Brian Gutekunst likes to deal. Currently, the Packers have 10 picks in this year's draft, 5 in the first 5 rounds, and then 5 picks in the last 2 rounds. Brian Gutekunst said on the call today he is willing to be as aggressive as he needs to be, whether it's in moving up in the draft, whether it's trading back. Steve Morgan will take a quick question right now. Will the Packers trade up or trade back? Especially with that number 30 pick, Pete, how likely is it that the Packers trade out of the first round?
We're always wild guessing here, but I'm thinking that this is a year even more likely than others that they trade back. I'm thinking that trade back is more likely than a trade up. Maybe if one of those 2 inside linebackers, Queen or Murray, is within shooting range, meaning giving up a 4th-round pick, moving up, I don't know, 3 or 4 spots. I could see him trading up for one of those two. Any other positions? I don't think so, unless there's some guy that they have a really high grade on who just keeps moving down the board for whatever reason. Then maybe they make a deal to get him at any position. So sitting at 30 with all these good receivers in this, at least good receiver prospects, doesn't mean they'll turn out to be good, but good prospects in this draft. I could see him being fine with trading from 30 to 34 or 36 or 37 and still getting a receiver they really like there and picking up an extra 4, and then they could use that 4 or package a couple 4s and move up from 62 to well into the early 50s for somebody they like. They just give them a lot of options there. So if I were a betting person, I would bet a lot more likely back than up. And I don't know. I'm kind of thinking right now, don't hold me to it. All right. I could change my mind, but I'm kind of thinking right now more likely trade back than sit and pick.
All right, Pete, I'm holding you to it despite what you say. Thank you, Steve, for bringing up this point. Speaking of receivers, Brian Gutekunst has acknowledged back at the Combine that this is going to be a deep draft for receiver prospects. He was asked, where are these receivers going to go? How quickly are they going to go? And of course, he said, well, it's either going to go one of two ways. They're going to go very quickly, or it's going to be a little bit slower and take a little bit more time for some of those receivers to go off the board. The Packers obviously still have a big need at receiver. They picked up free agent Devin Funchess this offseason. However, they still need a number 2 guy to go alongside Devontae Adams in their receiving core. Where are the Packers, if they were to stay put, where would they likely look for a receiver in this year's draft?
Yeah, I'm sure, there's always a lot of beauty and beholder and all that. So there's probably 4 or 5 guys that could be under consideration. If Ayuk from Arizona State makes it there, I would think he would be of real interest to him. Denzel Mims of Baylor is a bigger, faster guy. Ayuk's more of a quick, explosive guy. Pittman from USC, maybe. Stenault from Colorado, maybe. I think those 2 guys are more second rounders, but you never know. Like from player 15 or 20 through 50 or 60, there's not that much difference, and teams can have those guys rated all over the place depending on the team. Rieger from TCU, it seems a little high for him at 30, but maybe not, because he might be the most explosive out of all the guys we just talked about. So I guess those would be the main considerations. I don't think I'm forgetting anybody at who they might, if it's a receiver, who they might take at 30.
So in addition to receiver, Brian Gutekunst was also asked about the quarterback position, of course, and he's made it clear in the past that if the right player is there and available for the Packers, he will go after him. He says that the guy has to be a winner, and that's what's most important to the fit in Green Bay. He said on the call today that he hasn't spoken to Rodgers as to whether or not he'd be drafting his replacement this upcoming draft. They've spoken about other personnel needs of the team, but they have not spoken about the quarterback specifically. How realistic is it that the Packers select a quarterback in this year's draft?
You definitely cannot rule it out. He's, I think, almost a year older than Favre was when the Packers drafted him. So it's not too early for the Packers to be thinking that way. Now they got to really like the guy, and if Love is there, you wonder if they'll take him or not, or trade with somebody who wants him. Could be a tough decision there, depending on how the Packers have Love graded. But there's definitely a chance they do it. I'm going back and forth on this, and I don't have to make my pick till Wednesday, so I'm really not sure. My kind of gut feel right now is that they would pass on him and maybe try to trade with somebody who wants him and draft at another position, but reserve the right to change my mind by Wednesday, because this is not a no-brainer call. It all depends on how they have this guy graded and what chance they think he has of becoming a winning starting quarterback in the league.
I'll give you some time to think about that, Pete. It's a good incentive for everyone to check out PackersNews.com once the draft, right before the draft begins, for some of our thoughts as to who the Packers might take in this year's draft. Pete, let's discuss some of the ways the coronavirus has impacted not only the draft, but everything that's going on around the draft, including pro days. Pro days canceled. Brian Gutekunst spoke about this a little bit today on the call. He said that it's going to have somewhat of an impact on how the Packers are going to be able to assemble an undrafted free agent class. He says that him and his staff do not put a lot of stock in the virtual pro day tapes that agents have been assembling and sending to teams. He added that it's going to be important, as it always is, that the scouts do a good job and give as much information as physically possible on these players, because they're not going to have that information from the pro day. How challenging is it going to be for the Packers and any team to assemble an undrafted free agent class?
Yeah, I think a little more than usual because, again, it's being in the same room or in the office next door with somebody, because I think all these scouts and position coaches are on phones with guys saying, hey, we can offer your agent, saying we can offer this much for, it's just a free-for-all. 500 players going in 2 hours, and it's just a free-for-all. Anybody can sign anybody. And so they, the guys, they might be in the same room or in offices next door, and they can just peek their head around and say, hey, I just signed so-and-so, or I can get so-and-so for a $3,000 bonus. And he could say yes. Now the communication's a little slower. I was reading today where it was, I can't remember who the GM was, but he was basically saying he's going to give his scouts a little more autonomy to just do the deal instead of having to finish it with him, as long as they've agreed on parameters and of any given player. So he's going to give them some autonomy there. So maybe Gutekunst will do the same. So it'll make it a little harder. But human beings are very adaptive, and I'm sure they'll figure out a way to do it well enough anyway. And it probably is going to be a little tougher for some of these guys to make teams because they're depending on how long training camp is, they just and no off-season stuff. They just won't get a lot of time to show what they can do.
NFL teams are having to adapt because there haven't been pro days, and they're adapting because they're not going to be able to convene at their facilities in the future anytime soon that we know of. The Packers off-season program, the virtual off-season program now, is slated to begin next week. Gutekunst wouldn't answer many specifics about how that program is going to be structured. He said that's going to be a question more for head coach Matt LaFleur, the strength and conditioning staff. However, he did acknowledge that it's going to take a good deal of creativity to be able to replicate something that they would have done in person at the facility. What will be the key for the Packers to pull off an off-season program that runs smoothly?
Yeah, good question. I was talking with an assistant coach for another team, and the thing that he lamented was there are a lot of ways to teach, and you certainly can get a lot done in classroom settings and all that, but you still, for learning, you can't beat actually just getting out on the field and doing it and making mistakes and being shown how to do things properly, and then to do it a few times, and then you get all that brain and muscle memory going. So they won't have that. So it's the classroom stuff should be okay, I would think, and they'll have their time for that. I wonder how it's going to be with workouts. If the strength coaches can just spend time with guys while they're working out and tell them what to do and have a camera set up so they can watch them do it, or if they just give them a list of things to do and talk about the workout and then have the guy go do it on his own. I'm not sure how they're going to do it. These strength staffs usually have maybe 3 guys on them. It's pretty tough to monitor everybody working out. Maybe the assistant coaches are going to have to sit and on their computers and watch guys do their workouts too.
It's an interesting challenge, and I wonder if it's going to vary from team to team as well. I did a story recently that you can check out over on PackersNews.com. I spoke to defensive lineman Tyler Lancaster and just talked about how he's been able to handle his off-season training in his apartment. He doesn't have a big home gym. He lives in a 1-bedroom apartment, and he's been working out indoors and outdoors. He's been able to get outside onto a field. Sometimes he has to be inside, and he's doing workouts using his sofa for balance, using different things around the house. He's been able to acquire some things as well. and he sends videos to his trainer to have him evaluate exactly what he's doing, if he's doing something wrong. They have conference calls and they discuss that. So I wonder if a similar sort of situation will happen at the team level as well. And I hate to bury this news, but I think this is also worth mentioning as well, and it's important. Brian Gutekunst reported that no one in the organization that he knows of has tested positive for the coronavirus, which is certainly very good news. He, as really none of us know exactly what's going on and what the future will bring. Gutekunst acknowledges that he doesn't know if training camp will start on time. He was asked if he's confident that the season is going to start. What if there is no season? And he said that he didn't even want to think about that. How does one even begin to prepare for not having a season, given the fact that Gutekunst still has to prepare as if the season is happening?
Yeah, that's what he kind of made it. He made it sound like their first phase is planning as if camp will start on time. The draft's going to come off, and then no offseason stuff, and camp will start on time. And then that they have some contingency plans for later starts. You can only plan for so much when you only know so much. I'm sure the league has at least given them at least some indication or hints of what the possibilities are for when camp will start, later dates, how many games might there be if they shorten the season, things like that. So they can, you don't want to spend too much time planning on that stuff, especially with the draft here. Maybe now, they maybe had the coaches thinking about those things a little more in the last few days as their draft responsibilities wind down a little bit. And then after the draft, they'll have time to make even more of those contingency plans. And, nobody knows much of anything on all this. And we'll see where we're sitting a month from now, and then a month after that, and a month after that. And I was just talking with somebody today. I have no idea how long they can wait to make the decision on this. Can they make it in July? Can they make it in August? Who knows?
Who knows? Once we know, once we have more insight, we'll certainly share it with all of you as well. So let's move on to some of our questions here. We'll start with Drew. Drew asks, will the Packers target a quicker, prototypical slot receiver in the draft, or will they go after the stereotypical Brian Gutekunst favorite, big body, really speedy, longer guy in the draft this year? Gutekunst was asked if he's been considering whether or not the Packers need to add on a more stereotypical slot receiver type. And he said today that he's been going back and forth with head coach Matt LaFleur a little bit as to what their needs might be there. How realistic is it that they would prioritize a slot receiver in the draft over the best receiver available?
Yeah, if you're picking, one in the first or second round, unless the guy is just really special at that position, I don't know that you would just say, hey, this is our slot guy. But I do remember last year, I think it was at the owners' meetings, and Matt LaFleur talking, somebody was asking him about the big receivers and then slot receiver. And he said that he basically liked to have different body types mixed into his receiving core so that you can, you do have guys who are more the prototypical slot, or you just have different types of players that teams have to cover. So this is just my guess, because Gutekunst obviously really likes these big catch radius receivers. I'm thinking he's going to err more on the side of a smaller, more explosive, quicker, dynamic guy than a big guy, even a big, fast guy. That's just a guess, though. And, we'll see when the draft comes. But anybody who watched this team last year knows, they were not real dynamic on the receiving core. They had Devontae Adams makes big plays, and then it was, it got pretty thin after that. And so I'm still thinking they're going to err on just somebody who's explosive and quick and really dangerous with the ball in his hands. Doesn't have to be a smaller guy. There are 6'1", 6'2" guys who run really well after the catch, even if they're, they don't have these 40 times that just blow you away. But I'm thinking they're going to err more that way than for the, 6'4" receiver. not watch them draft a 6 Claypool from Notre Dame or someone like that.
Of course, that's how it works, Pete. Don't you know? Drew has some good questions. I want to take one more of yours, Drew, here. He asks if there's any potential that the Packers would be interested in making a veteran trade, trading a pick for a more developed player, especially in light of the fact that there is going to be such an abbreviated offseason program, or at least a drastically different offseason program. Then we don't know exactly when training camp is going to start, if it's going to start. How important is it that the Packers have a really solid veteran core, seeing as the rookie players this year aren't going to get the typical initiation before the season begins?
Yeah, and I know, people are talking about that, and they're talking about that teams, are going to air more for the, do deals for veterans. I wouldn't do that because, when you're drafting, you're not just thinking about the next season. You've got to be thinking 2 and 3 years down the road with these draft picks, because that's when they start peaking, as in their second, third, and fourth seasons. I mean, how many times do we see draft picks come in? They don't do much of anything as rookies, but they still become good players. Happens regularly. So if I'm running the team, I'm not thinking that much about that. But but the question about trades on draft day, sure, or draft weekend, those are always going to come up, and they could trade a pick for a player who might help them. And I don't really know any great prospects of people who are definitely going to be traded who play positions that they're looking for. You can see the other way too. Maybe they trade Lane Taylor, and for a pick. I don't know what they could get for him. I'm a 5 or a 6 maybe. I don't even know if it'd be that high, because teams might assume they're going to cut him after the draft. But so maybe they can get a pick for a guy like that if they want to add a little cap room. And these things are hard to predict because you never know who's available. I think some reports leak out about guys who are available, but I bet it's only about 10% of the guys who are actually available. And really, probably everybody but a handful of players on every team is available for reasonable price.
It's an interesting thought. Thank you, Drew, for your questions. We appreciate it. Rebecca asked a question here that I think transitions pretty nicely into what we were just talking about. Which positions do we think are most likely to have players, I'm assuming in the draft, who can contribute this upcoming season, given the fact that OTAs aren't really going to be a thing, and the fact that we don't know exactly what the situation is with training camp? Which positions, Pete, do you believe are most able to contribute right away without having prior NFL experience, typically?
Yeah, I guess it's just the same as it always is, because this is even accelerated. So it seems like corners usually can contribute right away. Running backs usually can contribute right away. Receivers are usually on the slower end of coming around. That's changed a little bit the last 3 or 4 years as passing's become so prevalent. Gutekunst was talking today in high school and college, so they're a little better prepared for playing, but you still have to get the timing with the quarterback, and that just takes time. So, and maybe D-line, corner, D-line, running back are the ones that jump out. And then, you just never know with any given player. Sometimes they just come in and they just have it, and they're smart and they have a great feel and they can do it. I remember Greg Jennings coming in. What draft was he? 07 maybe? 06 or 07? And he came in as a rookie. He played, he had a really nice season, and he played a lot right from the start. And you could see from the first week of camp that this guy was just a sophisticated football player. So, and he was only a second-round pick. So it's also just individual dependent, and there's probably some luck involved with picking guys who come in and help right away too.
We can focus on the short term as this question prompts us to, and the Packers can draft based on the situation at hand, where they don't know exactly how much preparation they're going to have in person for this upcoming season, or they could draft looking at the future, at what they're going to be needing in the future as players' contracts expire. They can take a look at some of the positions and just draft that way. How likely is it that the Packers take a short-term approach versus a more long-term approach, knowing that the situation that they're in currently is not going to last, hopefully, forever?
Yeah, I think it's going to skew a little towards longer term, just because, you look at what he did last year, drafting an outside linebacker after signing, 2 starters. So he took a little bit of a longer term upside approach with that. And you add in that they did sign an inside linebacker, and they did sign a receiver, and they did sign a right tackle, stopgap guys, but guys who could come in and be their starter right away if a rookie isn't ready to start. So they don't have to draft anyone at a position where the guy absolutely has to come in and start right away like they did last year, for instance, with Darnell Savage when they moved up to get him later in the first round.
We'll see what they end up doing there, and a lot of how they're thinking will be addressed early in the draft once they start picking. We'll see. Who knows? Thank you for that wonderful question, Rebecca. Thank you all for watching. We appreciate you joining us. We will be back sometime before the draft begins. And of course, we will be with you over the 3 days of the draft. Lots of live streams, breaking down all the picks, taking your questions, all the good stuff as usual. Stay safe, stay healthy, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.